You want answers?
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
You want answers?
You have offended my family.
I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth.
And you have offended the Shaolin Temple.
You can't handle the truth.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Radical Rant.
Washington cops fined 420 stone drivers. Really? You know, after writing on polls and statistics over this past few years, I always find it funny how media will jump all over a press release from some police agency with some meager scraps of data in it and then turn it into a 5-course meal of propaganda scaremongering. Here's the facts. The Washington State Patrol released preliminary data on positive THC blood tests from suspected impaired drivers for the first half of 2013. The crime lab reported 745 people tested positive for marijuana, and of those, 420 tested above the state's 5 nanogram per milliliter THC limit. Yes, 420. So add easy pot puns and stoner references to the media meal for dessert. Continuing with the facts. In the past 2 years, the annual total each year for overall positive marijuana blood tests in Washington is about 1,000 per year. In 2011, there were 506 of those tests that were over 5 nanograms. In 2012, there were 609 of those tests above 5 nanograms. Overall impaired driving cases, however, are on pace to hit the annual average of about 20,000. Now, based on those data, we find the Christian Science Monitor, proclaiming pot smokers arrested for DUI, a record high in Washington. Well, that's not exactly true. Yeah, to get a blood test, cops must make a DUI arrest and get a warrant, and in years past, about 1,000 tested positive for THC. But before legalization, all those positive tests, at any amount, not just the ones over 5 nanograms, were evidence used to convict on DUI charges. Now, any test below 5 nanograms is proof a driver was below the legal limit. So the 420 tests above 5 nanograms work out to 840. If we expand it, double it for the whole year, right? Because it's 6 months of data. Double it, we got 840. And that would still be below any of the 1,000 any amount DUIs that were registered each year prior. Now, the website Medical Daily goes even further. In their story, more Washington motorists test positive for pot following marijuana legalization. Their opening sentence proclaims, since fully legalizing marijuana in January, Washington State reported this week a 3-fold spike in marijuana-related arrests for suspected impaired driving. End quote. How did about 1,000 pot positives a year to 745 pot positives in 6 months become a 3-fold spike? Now, reading further, Medical Daily writes, those numbers compared to 1,000 such arrests over a 2-year period prior to the legalization of marijuana for recreational use. End quote. Aha. It seems the author misread a sentence from the original Reuters report that read, by contrast, in each of the last 2 full years, about 1,000 drivers who were pulled over test positive for THC, and missed the crucial each part. In each of the last 2 full years, about 1,000 drivers were pulled over. So this guy took the each, forgot about that, and figured it was 1,000 for that 2-year span. So divide that in half to get 1 year, that'd be 500 a year. And then you take the current 745 over 6 months, you double that for a year, that would be 1,490, close enough to 1,500 to say, a 3-fold spike. Now, other media outlets are more subtle in their accentuation of the negative. The Reuters piece was reprinted in several media outlets like the Chicago Tribune. It opens by pointing out the 745 drivers with positive pot tests, and then notes that over half of those tests were above 5 nanograms. and then compares that to the 1,000 positive THC drivers from 2011 and the 1,000 positive THC drivers from 2012. It's what they leave out that helps to set the scary frame. Let me show you how this works. I requested the actual data from Associated Press reporter Eugene Johnson, who got it via email from Bob Calkins, who's the Media and Community Relations Officer for the Washington State Patrol. This is the original table of data that was released that all these stories are being based on, okay? Now, I've taken the data and put it into a nice Excel because that's, what I do, and took a look at this data. So here's the way it works. Indeed, the rate of THC-positive drivers has increased to 27.2% of all blood tests ordered, up from roughly 20% of all tests in the years prior. And here you can see the table. There's the data. So as we look, 2009, there was roughly 4,800 tests. 20% of those were THC positive. 5,000 tests in 2010, about 20%, 19.5% were THC positive. 5,100 tests in 2011, about 20% were THC positive. 5,300 tests about in 2012, 18.6% positive. And now for the first half of 2013, 2,739 tests, about 27.2% of them are positive. Now, what they aren't pointing out in here, though, is the rate of positive drivers who are actually over the limit. If you look at these 1,036 positive THC tests from 2011, and you note that 506 of them were over the 5 nanogram limit, there was no actual limit in Washington State at the time, but that represents 48.8% of the positive tests that were over the 5 nanogram limit. In 2012, 61.6% of the positive tests were over the 5 nanogram limit. This year, it's down 5 percentage points to 56.4% of the positive tests being over 5 nanograms. So we've actually seen, since legalization has taken effect and a 5 nanogram limit has been put into place, fewer of the pot positive drivers are above that legal limit. It also means these 325 that were under the legal limit have themselves a pretty darn good defense against being impaired. They were under the limit. Now, indeed, we are getting 27.2% of these positive tests, but note that 2,739 tests puts us over the full year of having almost 5,500 tests when the year before it was almost 5,300. Also, we've got cops that are being trained and incentivized to go after pot arrests more. Just because you're catching more fish does not mean there are more fish. You may be using a bigger net. You may be fishing at a different time of day. You may have learned new techniques of fishing. You might have found a better fishing hole. That's right, kitty. Now, this still leaves us with 840 above 5 nanogram THC positives for 2013 compared to 609 in 2012. However, the number of tests ordered has been increased, and it also can be true that cops are more likely to order a blood test now than they were in the past. As Trooper Calkins told the Huffington Post, a quote that didn't make it to all these other news organizations, quote, "We're testing blood we didn't test before," end quote. So do we actually have more stone drivers on the road, or are cops now just better trained and incentivized to go after them? The real concern isn't whether there are more drivers caught with THC in their system. That's not terribly surprising given the state has legalized marijuana. The concern is whether harm has increased. On that front, we see in the various reports that the Washington State Patrol is on pace for their average 20,000 impaired driver stops. So it doesn't seem like they're seeing more impairment on the roads than before. The on pace then suggests they're at about, 10,000 stops over 6 months? So out of 10,000 stops, cops only felt the need to order a blood test a quarter of the time. And out of those 2,500 or so, they found 420 people over the legal THC limit. Okay. But according to Washington State Traffic Safety Commission's Target Zero data for 2013, the state is on pace to a record low 88 alcohol-related traffic fatalities and 80 THC-related fatalities for the year. That's the pace. Now, it could be much more than that because there could be many more alcohol fatalities as we enter the holiday months, for certain. But so far, compared to 6 months data of the previous years, we are still far fewer alcohol-related traffic fatalities and THC-related traffic fatalities. Those would be the lowest figures for 5 years and a decline of 22% for alcohol and 30% for THC from 2012 if we stay on this pace. Could it be that greater access to marijuana equals less abuse of alcohol, leading to lower traffic deaths from both? Now, it is certainly the case that stoned drivers are far better drivers than drunk drivers, but they're also far better drivers than people using certain legal prescription medications. According to research published this year in the Journal of Accident Analysis and Prevention, drivers who tested positive for marijuana had an odds ratio of 1.81 to 1 of being in a fatal crash compared to a sober driver. Those odds were 3.03 to 1 for narcotics like Vicodin, 3.57 to 1 for stimulants like Adderall, and 4.83 to 1 for depressants like Ativan. But each of those carries a warning on the bottle instructing users not to drive until they know how the medication affects them. None of those drugs carries any per se threshold in a blood test indicating automatic proof of impairment like cannabis and alcohol do. And alcohol comes in with an astounding 13.64 to 1 odds ratio for a fatal crash. So if some of those drivers are switching to the drug with the 1.81 to 1 risk, we should all be celebrating. So in summation, we have fewer people dying on the roadways, about the same amount of impairment detected on the road, more blood testing that has uncovered a lower ratio of positive drivers testing over the 5 nanogram limit, and 4 out of 9 drivers who tested below the new 5 nanogram limit have a legal defense to DUI charges they didn't have the year before. Isn't it interesting how mainstream reporting missed out on so many of these details? Hey folks, that's all the time we got. Join us in hour 2 for Toker Talk Radio. Brian the Red's in the house. We're going to have some fun. For him and me, Radical Russ, thanks for joining us. And until next time, take care of each other, Tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it,